to the Operation Weed Eradication report. I'm Brownfield anchor reporter Megan Grebner. With us is Gery Welker with BASF. Hello.
Good morning.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about the Operation Weed Eradication program, but we're also going to dig a little deeper into the herbicide resistance issue. When we talk about this, Gery, why is this something that is so vitally important that growers and farmers take care of and pay attention to, but so important to the ag and the ag industry as well?
Well, so I mean, there's several weeds that become resistant over the last couple of decades, and unfortunately, the last couple, well, maybe not the last couple, but two that are super important because of the characteristics they have is Palmer amaranth and water hemp, and so these weeds are. They're related. They're both amaranthus species, so pigweeds, but they have capabilities that a lot of other weeds don't. One is they produce just mountains of seed, right? And they're all super little tiny things. So, a plant doesn't look that big, and it's like, how can I have 500,000 seeds? Well, it has 500,000 seeds, and if it's a really big one, it has 1,000,000 seeds. And so when you have that kind of capability, that just produces a lot of weed seeds that growers will have to deal with in the future. And then the second one that makes it a unique problem to control is most weed seeds they have, they start growing in the spring once they reach X amount of growing degree units, and then they have a peak and then they tail off really, really fast. The problem with both those weeds is they don't start really early in the spring. Water hemp is 350 growing degree units before it really germinates. So that's, in my neighborhood in Indiana, that's like now, so it's middle of May, and beyond. And if you're a little farther south, it starts sooner. And if you're farther north, it's a little bit later. But so and then it has a huge peak that happens sometime in June, July, but then it doesn't drop off really fast. It has this really long tail. Right. And so when you make a pre-emergent herbicide application at planting time, most weeds are done germinating when that herbicide runs out of gas. Well, not these two weeds. So we really have to do a layered residual because they're going to continue to germinate when your first application has basically run out of gas. So then we have to make another application of a residual herbicide to basically get us to canopy. And then once we get to canopy, then we get the help from the growing crop that shades it out, and then we're pretty good. So that's the problem with those two weeds. It's really has another step in having season-long weed control, in that we need to add another residual that we've not been doing ever before. But these two weeds really dictate that we have to do that.
When we get to the end of the growing season, how concerned are we if there's still a weed standing and we didn't get one and we let one slip?
Yeah, so that's the other part of this is since they produce so much weed seeds, and I've had conversations with friends and farmers, and it's like, well, there's only a couple out there. I'm not going to go get them. I can't afford to do that, but they really can't afford not to, because we talked about how prolific they are. So you're producing, on an average size plant, 500,000 seeds per plant. And then if you got a really good one, it's, big one that's escaped, it's up towards 1,000,000. You run that through a combine, you just spread it across the rest of the field, and the cycle will never end, right? Now, the good thing about both those weeds is, unlike a lot of other weeds that can last in soil for almost ever, these things have a pretty short span. So if you can do a really good job of controlling every single either water hemp or Palmer that's in your field for several years, the seed supply diminishes to the point where it's like almost non-existent. So you can go from having a train wreck to having a very manageable field in a matter of a few years of just doing really diligent work of using, multiple sites of action. That's the key. So you don't develop more resistance, and doing other practices. So other cultural practices. If you're an area where you can do tillage, you do tillage. If you're a no-tiller, well, then maybe you incorporate, a cover crop that helps you, suppression of that. So there's lots of other tools that you can use besides herbicides, and that's what we want to get to. And then the last thing is, if you've done all your herbicide applications and now you're at, flowering soybeans, you're canopied up, and yet you still have a few poking out. Well, don't wait to harvest and run through the combine. That's where, either you go get them or you hire somebody to walk out there and get those handful of weeds that are left in the field. So you have a zero seed production year, and you do that for a few years in a row, you wind up with virtually no seed supply left in your field, and both those weeds become much easier to control.
Gery, when we talk about this, that's kind of where the Operation Weed Eradication program comes in, and we talked a little bit about that, but it's not just chemical, it's not just herbicides, it's also other things that maybe we're dialing back the clock a little bit and integrating some weed management practices as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's again, if you're in flat country that you've been doing tillage, you continue to do that. If you're a no-tiller, again, it's potentially doing cover crops to help suppress. If you're in row soybeans, if you're in 30-inch row soybeans, you have the opportunity to find a cultivator again and cultivate some of these acres that are potentially were a train wreck, and you need to get them back into a much manageable condition. So there's lots of tools, and including, like I said, walk the field and make sure that you take every last pigweed out of that field, whether it's Palmer amaranth or water hemp. Don't let it go to seed, and continue the never-ending cycle of trying to get a handle on these things. It's no pigweed needs to be let to go to seed, in these fields.
No weed left untouched, right?
Right. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about how you're working with your growers and with farmers around the country to promote these types of integrated and balanced practices, and how the Operation Weed Eradication folds into that.
So we basically have formed, I guess, a coalition, maybe is the best way to say that, or a group. So we got some other people involved. And so one of that would be AGCO. So, there are the sprayer people that are involved. Raven is involved. So we're all trying to work together into, getting more people initiated into, I don't want to say it's a pledge, but it's work on your individual fields, right? Because, you say eradication and people's eyes glaze over, you can't do that. Well, in your individual fields, you can do that, right? It's going to take a lot of effort, right? And so it's about starting clean, staying clean, all the way to harvest. And if you do that, I sound like a broken record, but if you don't let pigweeds go to seed, all right, there's no seed supply, and their longevity in the soil is relatively short. So in a matter of 3 or 4 years, you can go from, again, like I said before, you can go from having a train wreck to having a relatively easy time to controlling, both of those weeds.
How important is it to have this integrated and balanced approach to weed management, into prolonging the use of these herbicides that have become so important to our bottom line, and to help promote healthier fields and eventually higher yields?
Yeah, well, so the problem with both those weeds and a few others is they have the ability to become resistant to herbicides, right? And so, glyphosate resistant amaranth species are all over the place. So, that tool's gone. And they're resistant to ALSs. They're resistant, and so when glyphosate was gone, everybody ran to HPPDs in corn. So now there's HPP resistance. So, the tactic of switching to a new herbicide is good, right? But the better tactic is use multiple sites of action every year, right? And so if a weed encounters one herbicide, it has X percentage chance of become resistant. But if you have another herbicide, now it's X times X. And if you add another one, it's X times X times X. So your chances of becoming resistant to 2 or 3 effective sites of action in the same year are astronomical compared to becoming resistant to one. And so that's why we keep talking about, using, effective sites of action herbicides. right? And so you don't quit using Roundup because it still works on lots of things, especially grasses, but it's basically useless for water hemp. So that's where you have to add something that's effective, in there. And it's not just one. Don't try doing the silver bullet. Let's use dicamba resistance as an example. This has kind of already happened, unfortunately, in kind of cotton country. So it's glyphosate still killed grasses in cotton, and now we have DT cotton. So let's just use a dicamba product, and the easy button's back. Well, the easy button got broke really quick, right? Because there's glyphosate resistant and now dicamba resistant. I think it's palmer amaranth, somewhere in Tennessee. Now granted, it's a small area yet, and we can contain it, but we can't contain it if we continue to just hit the easy button. Because that's how it just gets worse and worse and worse. So we've got to institute other strategies like tillage, like cover crops, like using multiple sites of action, and last resort potentially is go out there with the hoe crew and take out the last few that's in that field. Don't let them go to seed, and you're on your way to having a manageable field again.
Gery, anything else?
Well, there's actually a website that you can go to. It's called operationweederadication.com. I'm always willing to talk to lots of growers and retailers, but your local BASF representative that's scattered all across the country can also help individuals with their recommendations on herbicides, and talk about some of these other things that are not herbicide related.
Gery, great to see you, and thank you for the visit today.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
I'm Megan Grabner with the Operation Weed Eradication Report on Brownfield.